And good morning. Hit the wrong button again. Um, Forgot to check my sound here. How we doing on sound? It is looking fairly good. Okay, well, good morning. Cheers to you. I wanted to finish up the discussion from the last episode where I created a customized Business Central API in a Docker container. And if you will recall, I added one field to the standard Business Central vendor API. So the vendor API retrieves a handful of fields for a vendor, but we learned through a Twitter discussion with Microsoft that they apparently do not intend to try and support country specific fields or functionality. So in the United States, we have some tax ID fields for vendors that are specific to US tax law and the IRS here. So companies that set up vendors, they need to record a couple values to indicate the tax status of that vendor. Well, that's a US specific field. And understandably, you could argue either way. Microsoft has apparently chosen to not support those for every single country in the world. I get it. I don't blame them. But it is a little inconvenient because now we are forced to, in each country, the partner or customer is forced to develop their own custom version of the BC API. And I'll use the term customized, right? We're not having to create a custom API from scratch. As you saw in my last live stream, you're able to take a copy of the full source code from the BC, the Microsoft Business Central API, copy that AL source file, and just make the modifications that you need for your needs. And so anyway, I'm going to continue that and show, let's try testing different post and get and post scenarios. I try to get just in a browser, so I want to expand that, add additional field, and test a post or a put, because that's the one thing I was curious about. Business Central and AL development is a very different world than what I'm used to. So I just want to see how it behaves, see if we can break it, see if it's just really as easy as it seems. Okay, but before we jump into that, a little housekeeping. Dynamics Con voting is open. So if you haven't heard, there are something like 140 some Business Central sessions that have been submitted for Dynamics Con, and it is a mind-blowing turnout. You just keep scrolling and scrolling and scrolling. So that makes voting especially challenging because there are so many sessions, so many great topics that it's like, now we do have 18 votes. You can spread that across different tracks. If you're interested in the Power Platform track, you can put some votes there. Business Central, F&O. There is even a GP track this year. But, if you're solely focused on BC, you have 18 votes. And if I get a whole bunch of votes, I throw out the number 500. I had a hard time getting to 30, so I'm guessing 500 isn't going to happen. But if I get a lot of votes, then you, dear audience, can vote for my wardrobe at the Dynamics Con conference. And for your pleasure, I have offered a few just stunning recommendations to give you a feel for just how incredible this opportunity is. Now, I had no idea that there were leopard print suits with shorts. I mean, I've gone my entire life just in a wardrobe bubble, apparently. I probably would have worn this type of outfit for years had I known it existed. Now, this model is clearly, not up to the standards of my physique, but I can guarantee you that I would make a leopard print suit with shorts look stunning. Now, I'm going to have to modify my camera setup because I obviously am only doing a headshot here. And And yeah, so I'm gonna have to like figure out how to scoot back and move my camera and zoom out so that we can just get a full vertical shot of me next to a PowerPoint presentation, maybe some video magic to get that in there. But leopard print, come on. Now, I also found that Alibaba is like, it's my new wardrobe consultant because I found this gem of paisley and psychedelic carnival fun on Alibaba. Now, the challenge will be I'm sensing that I'm going to need to get to 500 votes very quickly because they don't just make these in a factory by the thousand. I'm sure these are handcrafted, highly tailored, bespoke Savile Row pieces of art. And so I'm going to have to get my order in for one of these beauties so that it can be shipped on a boat from China or wherever it's made in time for the conference. And that actually may be a problem because the shipping times can be weeks. So get your votes in, get me to 500 votes, and I could be wearing one of these gems, or even I could have an attack dog costume. Now, I'm noticing that it may be hard to type or use a mouse when I have dog mittens on the end of my hands. So I'm not quite sure if that has some flap option where I can tuck my hands outside of the dog's head. But, we have a range of options. As you can see, it's a very diverse set of options. So get your vote in. And yes, I see Jeremy is mentioning inflatable T-Rex. I did see like some giant inflatable, almost like the sumo wrestler outfits, but they were enormous. I don't even know that I could stand here and fit that in the camera. So I don't know if an inflatable is within the confines of my Hollywood grade studio here, but yeah, this is your opportunity to just make my wardrobe shine during the premier Dynamics presentation conference event of the year. Yes, Jeremy mentioned that if I wear green, I could have the floating head effect. So that's another option. I do have a green screen behind me, so we'll see. Okay, so with that housekeeping done, you may recall, just wanted to mention again that when you're working with Docker with Business Central APIs, you do need to remember to specify, if you're using the multi-tenant version of the Docker containers, which I believe is default, at least it's just default on mine. I think you have to turn it off if you don't want multi-tenant. If you're specifying just your container name, then you need to put tenant equals default at the end of your API URL. Otherwise, BC Container Helper does automatically add a second entry to your Windows host file, so you can do container name -default. So in my case, dev17 is my container name. Dev17 default is the easiest way, so I don't have to deal with a parameter at the end of the URL. So for example, dev17 default port 7048, BC API v2.0 companies, vendors, etc. So just remember that. Someone on Twitter saw my last live stream, I believe, and they're like, that's why it's not working. They also got stuck in the trap. You'll get some type of authentication error if you don't specify the default tenant with your API URL. Okay. And there it is. Authentication _ invalid credentials. So if you do run into that, just remember that you need to specify default somewhere. Okay, so recap. We were working with the vendor API endpoint, and I added the IRS 1099 code, which is one of those tax fields that we have for vendors in the US. And it's miscellaneous, legal, investments, property. There are a few bizarre categories based on whatever arbitrary concern was being addressed 30 years ago when this thing was invented. There's only one or two that I care about, or most customers care about these days. But once you add that field to your custom URL, as we saw, you specify your my hand's getting cut off. Your publisher, like prefix or initials, your API category, I think it was, and then the version. And we'll look at that just to refresh our memory. But once you do that, you can specify your custom parameters, and that redirects or reroutes the API engine in BC to hit your custom endpoint rather than the default Business Central endpoint. So it was super easy, and that was really cool. Now, it was a little too easy, and I'm kind of suspicious when things are that easy. So I tested Get in the browser last time. So I want to now take a look at post and put, and let's add an additional field just to see how things go. So it's a little bit of impromptu off-roading. I've done a teensy bit of prep, but most of this will be kind of on the fly. So let's jump into it. Okay, so here I have Visual Studio Code with my custom project that has the API v2 vendors.page.al that I copied from the Microsoft AL app extensions Git repository. You just download the zip file, you extract it, you pull out just the page you want, drop it in a new project. Now let's look back at the okay, it wasn't here. I think it is in the page. So let's go to the top of the page, and you see my API version is 1.0, vendors, just like the standard. And this is a page type API. My API group, for lack of a better term for now, is just custom. I don't yet know what conventions you might use for API groups. You know, if you're building a whole bunch of custom API, maybe you have a reporting API group. Maybe you have a manufacturing or fixed assets or whatever other API groups you want. And this is my publisher ID. So those are the components that go into your custom URL or custom endpoint once you create this API. So let's now jump down to 1099 and listen with I sound like I know what I'm doing. This is amazing, but I'm just kind of winging it here. So don't let the confidence fool you. So we have the IRS 1099 field. That's how it's output. I am retrieving the rec.irs 1099 code. That is the field from the vendor table. And I just added this onValidate trigger register field set. That's all it took, was adding these 4 lines and modifying this field up here. And magically, we can now jump over to Postman. And if you are not familiar with Postman, you need to vote for Mary Thompson's DynamicsCon session in the BC track. She, like me and my friend Tanya Henderson and many others, have had the crash course on Postman from a friend or colleague. I believe Stefan helped Mary with Postman. And it is a little intimidating at first, but I highly recommend learning it. So Mary recently learned it. She sees the value of it as well. So she created a Business Central, or excuse me, a DynamicsCon presentation to learn Postman for BC APIs. Vote for it. I would vote for hers above mine. It is a super valuable thing, and you don't have to be a developer. That's the great thing. Tanya Henderson is not a developer, and she uses this constantly now. She is a Postman guru now and uses it all the time to help with calling the BC APIs for reporting. Mary Thompson uses it all the time now in order to interact with Power Apps and Power Automate. So great session, highly recommend it. So let's get in here. And so this is the standard Business Central API. You notice I have my Dev 17 default API 2.0 companies and vendors. So let's hit send, and what do we have here? So let me make this a little bigger. I don't want to maximize, but okay. So here we have the standard API, and you notice that IRS 1099 code is blank. No bueno. Let's go to my vendor with 1099. And you'll notice same base URL, but BC API SPE custom v1.0. This is our custom super cool one. Let's click on send and scroll down, and okay. My Business Central Docker containers refresh every single morning. I have a script that wipes it out, rebuilds it. So let's go back to this dude here. And where is it? It's under invoicing. No, payments. Okay, so let's do our 1099 code of MISC, miscellaneous income, and let's give this guy a federal ID of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, etc. Okay, so now we've saved that, right? Let's go back into Postman, click on send, and moment of truth, look at that. So we're feeling pretty cool. We're feeling pretty confident. Like we got some swagger that we added a custom field to a Business Central API. This is awesome. We now have the power. And next up. So let's try a post. So we did a get. That was cool. But, gets are pretty easy and simple. Now, if you know of a better way to prepare a JSON payload for a post, I am all ears, but this is the very low-tech way I have done it. So I'm going to take, let's do this. Let's just do a brand new one. I'm not gonna do number. I'm gonna let the number series handle that. I think there's a number series. And I'm just gonna copy this core piece of the payload to start. So now, let's create a new tab. Let's go into our body and let's do raw and JSON. I'm gonna paste this in. Okay, so there is our raw, and can I clean up this formatting? There we go. Let's get rid of the comma at the end. And now we need to turn this into magical JSON. There we go. Hit tab. So I've just kind of made this up, and we'll see a couple of errors. So don't be surprised. Okay, so let's say Steve's super company. I'm not too creative right now. Let's get some coffee. Okay, so we're going to skip payment terms ID, payment method ID. I'm trying to make this as simple as possible so that this doesn't fail. Let me skip currency ID. Now, we do want to include IRS 1099 code because the whole point of this is the test that when we do a post here, does it work with our custom API? Okay, and I'm going to do steve@email.com, and let's just fix this. And Georgia, come on. This is Los Angeles. Home, if you've seen my tweets, Los Angeles is home to an amazing guy who put a Italian brick wood-fired pizza oven in the back of a pickup truck, and he rented a parking lot in the middle of LA, in not the greatest neighborhood in LA, let's be honest, and hundreds of people come every night to buy a high-end pizza from a guy who cooks it in a pizza oven in the back of a truck from a parking lot. And it was an amazing experience. Very cool. And yeah, it was only sketchy for a few minutes there, but it was really cool. Kids had a great time. Okay, so let's do, what's my blog? blog.steveendo.com. Okay, so now let's grab our custom URL, and we don't want to specify a vendor ID. So let's hit the vendor endpoint. And I think I may have done this once or twice before. I can't remember the last time I actually did a post or a put. I have primarily only tested with get because I haven't had a customer who's had this. So let's save this in our Postman, and let's call this 20 vendor. Let's do a post vendor with 1099 code, and you want to save it to a folder, BC Docker. Okay, so we now need authorization, And this, we're going to use just basic auth. And let me go grab my auth key, user, users, admin. If you're not familiar with this, this is how you do basic auth. This is eventually going away in a year now, but this is the simplest for testing for now until I figure out how to properly use OAuth. Okay, so we're going to save that. Fingers crossed, place your bets. Can I get it right on the first time? 90% chance it will not work right on the first time. What? Wow, you should have bet. Look at that. Okay, so we specify 1099, or excuse me, IRS code, IRS 1099 code. So let's go into Business Central, see if this works. This is V10. Okay, so that was pretty cool. Now, I have some other antics to test with this. So there's our V10, Steve's Super Company. So Jeremy is a great offer. Remind me to show you auth using Postman. Oh, yes. So good point. So in this example, I am not using variables in Postman just for simplicity's sake. But if I go back over here, I do have everything set up. And that's why I want you to vote for and attend Mary Thompson's session. Hopefully she covers this. So when I go into my normal ones, everything is a variable. So I have environment variables for my base URL environment suffix, my authentication and authorization, inherit from parent. You know, this is all like super fancy schmancy with variables. For simplicity's sake, I'm not getting into that for this demo. I'm just going to keep it simple, and that's why you'll see me keep copying and pasting stuff. Normally, you do not need to do that. You won't want to do that. You'll want to set up everything with a variable properly. So this is just keeping it simple for demo purposes. Okay, so here we created a vendor, super cool, Steve's Super Company, vendor 10, and the moment of truth. Look at that. Miscellaneous. We are rocking it now. Now, that's fine and dandy. That's a positive test. That's great, but you know, if you've ever worked with users for very long or integrations or anything, you know that that is the ideal happy path. Let's break it. So I'm going to change this to a put. Miscellaneous 123123. Now, I'm assuming that's not a valid code. Look at that. Put requests for vendors of EDM type collection are not allowed. Oh, put requests. Look at that. So can we do a patch? This is how much I know. Patch for vendors collection. EDM type. That's so interesting on v2.0. Patch requests. So how do you update? Anyone out there know how to do an update? I thought it was put is idempotent. Post is create. Put is idempotent to create or update. Patch is update. So that's interesting. So I'll need to look into that. Let me just screenshot that. So a patch request for vendors collection. So okay, let's just take the path of least resistance. I'll look into that later, but patch will work, but you need e-tags. Thank you, Jeremy. Okay, fine. Let's do some e-tags. Thank you. So I'm not going to go fully into e-tags, but you'll kind of see what that is. So let's do a different one. Let's do a post. Steve's Super Company numero dos. And this is right next door at 234 Street in Los Angeles. And let's have this invalid. And okay, so we're just going to do an invalid right off the bat. Awesome. Look at that. So I tried to submit an invalid value of miscellaneous 123. And that's the custom field, essentially, that we added to the GP API. Okay. And thank you, Jeremy. Let me get back to that. And this invalid value is saying the IRS field The field IRS 1099 code of table vendor contains a value that cannot be found in the related table IRS 1099 form box. Awesome. So they have a related table that has the appropriate lookup values for the IRS 1099 code, and miscellaneous 123123 is not one of those. So we did nothing in the custom vendor API page or customized vendor API page where I added those 4 lines. I added no additional validation. And what is fundamentally different about Business Central and AL that I am not used to is that table layer, the data layer, automatically handles validation. Coming from the .NET world, that is just not the case. And we have our data access layer, but it is just super, super dumb and simple. It is insert, update, delete. There's basic, operational validation to ensure success or handle failures, but there is no business logic in that layer. So I'm used to having to always code that business logic and validation in the higher layers, UI layer, middle application layer. And yeah, this is amazing to me. It's like, that is so easy, because that's where so much work is time and spent on all that plumbing. So it's really fantastic to see. And Jeremy points out that my mistake was, so you have 2 options. If you do a patch, you need to have the E tag. If you do a patch or perhaps a put, I need to have the vendor ID in the top so that it knows what vendor am I updating. So, okay, got it. And Jeremy explains, the operation is not valid for a collection, means I'm attempting to submit data to a URL that is meant for a group of records or a collection. So I just hit vendors as my endpoint, but I'm doing a put. And it's saying, well, I'm expecting you to import 20 records here, the vendor's URL. So let's give this a try. So let's see if I can. So this is another trick that I've used. So how do I modify this Steve Super Company? So you don't really see the ID here. So this is the way I've done it. Control Alt, hold up. Let me launch the app that Jeremy recommended called Karnak. There are a few ways to show the keystrokes on screen while I'm doing this streaming. Karnak is a cool one. So let's see, Control Alt F1. Cool, so you should see that on screen. Okay, there we go. So page inspection is a tool that you can see, and let's see if ID is in here. System ID. I don't know which one it is. I think it might be System ID, but let's just do a new one just to correlate that, and we'll just have that as a lesson here. Okay, so I'm going to do, so Steve's Super Company 2 failed because miscellaneous 123 was not valid. So let's fix that, and let me save this. I'm hitting vendors. I'm going to do a post. I'm going to hit send, and there we go. So here's our ID. I'm just going to save this out to Notepad. Okay, so this is Steve 2. Okay, so that completed successfully. So now let's go back here. Let's pull up Steve Super Company 2, and let's see which ID this is. Okay, 5F2, that is our system ID. So when you want to figure out which record is being updated, the quick way here is to use page inspection, grab the system ID. Now, I take that back. If you are a Postman user, this is a cool thing. We can go back to vendor here. I can just hit this, and I'll remove this GUID. I can just do a get of my vendor list. This is another way to do it just within Postman, so you're not having to go back into BC. And I can say, oh, now there's a way to filter this, but I won't get into that. Let's scroll down. There's V20. There's my ID there. That's another way to do it. So if you know Postman, you have all the power and you're a superhero for Business Central APIs. So now that we have that ID, let's try to do a put. Let's see if that works without an E tag. So here's our post. Okay, so let's do a save as, and let's do, oh, no, 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 don't shut down. Okay, I have an automatic script that shuts down my servers when they're not in use, like the weekend. So, okay, so Don Raj Bansal asks, why not do get again and take the ID from response? Yep, that's the smarter way. So I don't do this a lot. I've only played around with it. So yes, you can go back and do the get from Postman. If an insert was successful, you can also get the ID from that. So let's give that a try here. So we got the ID. I'm going to do a put save to BC Docker. I'm going to specify this vendor ID in my URL, vendors. Okay, and let's do suite 1, 2, 3, and then let's just make sure this works with a put and send. Okay, could not validate the client concurrency token. Yeah, and so I didn't do the E tag. I didn't grab the E tag. I should have done that. Okay, so this is, so I may be getting off track, but there's our get, there's our put. Let's go back to our post and let's do a number 3. And let me just copy the whole thing. Okay, so here's number 3, suite 3, and we have a correct miss. Let's send it. Okay, so now I'm just going to copy this whole thing. I think that's there. Okay, so here we have an E tag, OData E tag, and here we have the ID. So this is a side off-roading venture, but let's give this a try. I am curious, can we just do this payload here? Now, I need to remove some things because I don't need a timestamp on there. Let's try removing the context. Let's keep the E tag, keep the ID, the number, and this is a put. And let's do suite 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. I know you all are screaming out there about what I'm doing wrong, but you have to wait a solid 30 seconds or so till I see the comment. So, okay, invalid request body correlation ID. So that is E tag goes into the header. So Jeremy is saying E tag is not in the JSON body, it goes in the headers using if match. Okay, so I'm a little out of my depth here. A little understatement of the month, right? So I'm not going to do that, but my point was to see that if I do a post with an invalid miscellaneous, or excuse me, IRS 1099 code, can I get it to fail? Is it validated? And yes, that was the main lesson of this. If I have a valid code, it does create my vendor successfully here. So we see Steve Super Company number 2, and we see that we have 1099 miscellaneous. So that works. If I submit a invalid code, then that gets rejected. So that's super cool. So now the final piece of the puzzle is we want to retrieve another field because you see there's a federal ID number. And when you're importing an IRS 1099 code, let's say miscellaneous, you may very likely also want to insert the federal ID number. Or if it is a corporation, you will want, they may not have a 1099 code, but you will want to submit their corporation federal ID. So let's give that a try. And this is where we off-road, folks. So I'm going to just copy this. Okay. And I don't know what this field is called. It says, oh, come on. Let me just go back to one where I have the ID number. So we have the 1099 code. We got that tax or federal ID number. So let's do Control Alt F1 and federal. Okay, so it apparently is called Federal ID No. Very cool. So I'm just going to copy that and let's call this Federal ID No, and this will be rec dot federal ID no, and can I just, oops, federal ID no. Let's make it look like this. Okay. And on validate, register field set, field number. Let's get the field number for this guy. Federal ID number. So just as we kind of expanded that existing dummy blank IRS 1099 code field that was there, which will probably get removed in a future release because they don't want to maintain it, we are copying that, adding this new field, which kind of looks like it should work. I'm just kind of mimicking it. And let's save that. Let's do a Control F5, publish without debugging. Okay, so now we've got our vendors here. So now if I go back to Postman and I'm going to look at my post guy, let me close this, save changes. Let's ignore the put for now. Okay, so now, actually, let's do the get first. So let's do a get for this vendor, and I do have a federal ID number there. Look at that. Moment of silence. That is so cool. And let me put this in context. We just modified a customized Business Central API by adding these lines. 1, 2, 3, 4 lines if you ignore the beginning, end, and wrapper stuff. I don't even know what to say about that. If you have developed other APIs, and not only that, this does gets and posts with validation. Paste it in these lines, Control F5, publish, and bam. So the time efficiency of doing this. Now I kind of understand that I've actually done it. I understand why Microsoft says it is so easy for partners or customers to create a customized API. It doesn't make sense for us to have to maintain this for, 30 countries or wherever is supported for Business Central right now. I get it from the developer perspective. Now, I also empathize with the small customer or the small partner who doesn't have a developer on staff. This looks easy to me because I have done things that are vastly more complex and painful to achieve something like this. So I understand in context, this is super easy from a developer's perspective. From a customer perspective who doesn't have a developer, a small Business Central partner who is focused on the functional side, this is an insurmountable task, right? The amount of background knowledge required to get to this point is pretty heavy. So not trivial in absolute terms. In relative terms, super, super easy. So that's really cool. We just added 2 additional fields to a customized version of the Business Central out-of-the-box Vendors API, and bam, it's up and running. We have our own endpoint. We can version our API. We can do whatever we want with this now. We can support IRS 1099 code and federal ID number, not only for gets, but posts, and puts and patches or whatever you want to do. And, you can go crazy. And if you had custom tables associated with this or table extensions, you can add those in, presumably with a tad bit more work for your validation, making sure everything is handled there. So I think that's super awesome. And yeah, I don't know what to say other than that was cool. So it is really that easy. We did a get. We did a post. I need to look into the puts based on the, let me just screenshot this chat, based on the advice from Jeremy. I need to look into the IDs and the E tags and how to handle that. Now, I did learn that, to be fair. I am a terrible student. I did attend AJ Kaufman's Business Central APIs class, but it was a good 6 months ago or whatever, and I hadn't used it yet. So I know kind of much of the stuff in the back of my brain. I just don't know the details because I haven't used it. Okay, so Jeremy Jeremy warned me last time about this. He says, sadly, it is not that easy for documents. So, good point. We're dealing with a master record here, right? A vendor, a customer, an item, your core object records in the ERP system. And if you're doing a sales order or a purchase order or a receipt or some type of transaction, Jeremy is advising it is not that easy. It's a different world. So yes, understand that distinction. So that's a good point. I haven't tried any of the transactional stuff yet. So there you go. It's kind of the, baby steps, one thing at a time. So that was pretty cool. I'm impressed, and that was fun. I'll do some more. And now that I've done it, things seem so like complex and insurmountable and intimidating at first. And then you do it, you're like, wait, that was it? And once you do it a few times, it becomes second nature and you forget how hard it seemed beforehand. So I've finally done it. Customized API. It's not a custom from scratch API, but a customized API. And it wasn't nearly as bad as I thought. Super easy, very cool, awesome functionality. In other platforms I've used, nowhere near that easy. So I hope you enjoyed that. Have a great Sunday and, do something fun. Get out there and try a new crazy restaurant in the middle of your town that you've never done before. So have a good one. Enjoy.